When Jessica Carter, a single mom and nurse, received a shocking letter doubling her rent overnight, she thought it had to be a mistake, until she uncovered the deliberate plan to evict families like hers. At the center of it all was a corrupt rent control board chairman laughing about displacing lower-income tenants for profit. But when a determined journalist exposed their web of bribery and lies, Jessica's fight became a rallying cry for justice. And just wait until you hear the twist that brought the system crashing down, and how one woman's resilience changed everything. Jessica Carter had always prided herself on making the best of tough situations. Raising her 8-year-old son, Tyler, on a nurse's salary in Los Angeles wasn't easy, but she had managed to carve out a modest, stable life in her rent-controlled apartment. The 2-bedroom space wasn't much, faded paint, creaky floors, but it was theirs. It was home. So when she pulled an official-looking envelope from her mailbox one sunny morning, she didn't think much of it at first. Bills, notices, junk mail, it all blurred together. But as her eyes scanned the letter, her stomach dropped. Dear Miss Carter, effective February 1st, your monthly rent will be adjusted to reflect current market rates. The new rate is $4,000. Failure to comply will result in eviction proceedings. Her first reaction was disbelief. This had to be a mistake. Rent control laws were clear. Her apartment was supposed to be protected. She called the rent control board immediately, her heart pounding as she waited on hold. When she finally got through, the woman on the other end spoke in a robotic monotone, as though she'd repeated the same lines 1,000 times that day. The increase complies with adjusted market rates as reviewed by the board, the representative said. Jessica's voice wavered. But this is illegal. Rent control laws don't allow increases like this. There's no way... Ma'am, the woman interrupted, her tone sharpening. If you have concerns, you can file a formal dispute. Otherwise, the new rate stands. Click. Jessica stared at the phone in stunned silence. Her mind raced. She couldn't afford $4,000 a month, not even close. She barely scraped by as it was, juggling long shifts at the hospital and Tyler's school expenses. But as disbelief gave way to anger, she knew this wasn't just an error, it was a deliberate move. That suspicion was confirmed later that evening, when she ran into Mr. Patel, her elderly neighbor, outside the building. Mr. Patel, who'd lived in his apartment for 20 years, was like a grandfather to Tyler and a comforting presence for Jessica. But tonight, his usually warm face was pale and drawn. Jessica, he began, clutching an identical letter in his wrinkled hand. They're pushing us out. I've lived here for 2 decades, and now they're trying to destroy us overnight. His voice cracked, and his hands trembled as he spoke. They want to turn this place into luxury condos. We're nothing to them, just in the way. The weight of his words hit Jessica like a punch to the gut. She looked at the letter again, her hands tightening around the paper. It wasn't just her, it was all of them. The entire building was under attack, and the people behind it didn't care about the lives they were uprooting. Jessica's pulse quickened as she realized she couldn't stay silent. Her frustration boiled into a simmering determination. She wasn't just fighting for herself or even for Tyler. She was fighting for Mr. Patel, for the other tenants, for everyone who couldn't afford to lose their homes. We'll fight this, she said firmly, though her voice shook. We have to. Mr. Patel looked at her with watery eyes, nodding slowly, but Jessica could see the doubt on his face. He'd lived through decades of seeing the system fail people like them. She was determined to prove him wrong. That night, as she sat on her worn-out couch with Tyler fast asleep in his room, Jessica opened her laptop. The letter sat beside her, its harsh words practically taunting her. With a deep breath, she began researching. She didn't know much about legal battles or how to take on a rent control board, but she had something they didn't expect, a willingness to fight until the very end. And as the quiet hum of her computer filled the room, Jessica promised herself one thing: she wasn't going down without a fight. Jessica sat at her kitchen table, the eviction notice crumpled in her hand. The number $4,000 stared back at her like a cruel joke. She had run the numbers over and over, hoping for some miracle, some overlooked solution that would make it all work. But no matter how many shifts she picked up at the hospital, no matter how much she cut back, there was no way she could afford it. Her 8-year-old son, Tyler, shuffled into the kitchen in his Spider-Man pajamas, rubbing his eyes. "Mom, are we moving again?" he asked, his voice soft but heavy with worry no child should carry. Jessica froze. They had already moved 3 times in the past 5 years, each time forced to leave a home she could no longer afford. She had fought so hard to give Tyler stability after the divorce, to make this small apartment their safe space. But now, that safety was slipping away, and there was nothing she could say to make him feel secure. Her throat tightened. "No, baby," she said finally, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "We're staying right here, I promise." But as Tyler wandered back to bed, Jessica's composure shattered. She buried her face in her hands and let the tears come. This wasn't just about numbers on a piece of paper. It was about her son, about keeping a roof over his head and giving him the life he deserved. When the tears dried, something else took their place. Resolve. If the system was trying to push her out, she would push back. She opened her laptop and began researching late, into the night. Rent control laws, tenant rights, legal loopholes. She dove into a world she had never navigated before. The more she uncovered, the angrier she became. It wasn't just her building. Dozens of tenants across the city were being targeted, and nearly all of them lived in low-income minority neighborhoods. The pattern was glaring, but what Jessica found next made her blood run cold. Through a community forum, she connected with another tenant who had managed to dig up internal emails from the rent control board. The emails revealed a chilling plan. Board members had been colluding with a luxury development company. Their goal was clear: force tenants out, demolish the buildings, and replace them with high-end condos. The emails even included callous remarks about how those people wouldn't fight back. Jessica felt sick to her stomach. This wasn't just greed. It was calculated, deliberate exploitation. She printed out every email, every document, and every law they had violated, assembling a binder of evidence. But when she tried to sound the alarm, no one listened. She called local news stations, only to be told her story wasn't newsworthy. Lawyers wanted thousands of dollars up front just to review her case. Even the tenants' rights organizations she reached out to seemed overwhelmed, promising to look into it, but never following up. Meanwhile, the letters kept coming. Each one was more aggressive than the last. Final notices, threats of eviction, warnings that sheriffs could arrive to remove her and Tyler at any moment. Jessica's heart sank every time she opened her mailbox, but she refused to let the despair consume her. One night, exhausted and defeated, she stared at the stack of eviction notices on her table. The weight of it all felt unbearable. She thought about giving up, about packing her bags and leaving quietly like so many others had. But then she thought about Mr. Patel, about the single mother across the hall, about the elderly couple on the first floor. They didn't have the energy or the resources to fight back. If Jessica gave up, who would stand up for them? Her despair turned into a burning determination. "They think they can scare us into silence," she muttered to herself. "They're wrong." Jessica wasn't a lawyer or a journalist. She was a nurse, a mom, a woman trying to make it through life. But she had something those board members didn't expect: a refusal to back down. And as she began drafting emails to anyone who would listen, Jessica knew one thing. She wasn't just fighting for her home. She was fighting for justice. Jessica was on the brink of giving up. Weeks of relentless research, unanswered emails, and mounting eviction notices had drained her spirit. The weight of the fight seemed unbearable, and she couldn't help but wonder if she was fooling herself by thinking one person could stand up to an entire system. Then came the message that changed everything. It was a simple email from someone named Ethan Moore. At first, she almost deleted it, assuming it was spam or another dead end. But the subject line caught her eye. "Saw your story. Can we talk?" Ethan, as it turned out, was a young journalist working for a scrappy online publication. He'd stumbled across Jessica's posts on a tenants' rights forum while chasing leads for a story. His publication wasn't exactly mainstream, but Ethan was hungry, driven, and, most importantly, unafraid to ruffle feathers. When they met at a nearby coffee shop, Ethan came prepared. His laptop was packed with notes and bookmarked links, his notepad scribbled with questions. "Your case isn't just one story, Jessica," he said, his eyes lit with a mix of urgency and excitement. "It's a pattern. If I can connect the dots, this could blow up." Jessica handed him her binder of evidence, the pages she'd spent sleepless nights compiling. Ethan's jaw tightened as he read through the emails and documents. "This isn't just unethical," he muttered. "It's illegal. These people belong in jail." For the first time in weeks, Jessica felt hope flicker inside her. Ethan dove in head first. He interviewed tenants from other buildings, unearthed public records, and even tracked down a whistleblower who had worked for the luxury development company. The deeper he dug, the worse the story became. There were bribes to board members, doctored financial reports, and a web of corruption stretching across the city. Within weeks, Ethan published the first article, "Evictions for Profit: How Greed Fuels Los Angeles Housing Crisis." It was raw, emotional, and packed with hard evidence. Jessica's story was front and center, her name and photo accompanied by quotes that painted a vivid picture of her fight. The response was immediate. The article went viral, shared thousands of times across social media. The comments were flooded with outrage. "This is disgusting. How is this even legal?" "Stay strong, Jessica. We're with you." Time to hold these crooks accountable. Soon, other outlets picked up the story. Local news stations ran segments on the corruption within the rent control board, showing footage of Jessica's building and highlighting the systemic injustice. National publications followed, turning Jessica into an unlikely symbol of resistance. Protests erupted outside the rent control board's headquarters. Hundreds of people gathered, carrying signs that read, "Homes Not Greed," and "Justice for Jessica." Community leaders and activists joined the movement, amplifying the calls for accountability. Jessica attended one of the rallies, standing nervously on the steps as the crowd chanted her name. Ethan was by her side, notebook in hand, documenting every moment. "Jessica," he said, pulling her aside as the crowd roared, "this is bigger than us. This isn't just about your building or even the city. They've been doing this for years, and no one's ever fought back. You're the first to make it this far." Jessica looked out at the sea of people, their faces full of hope and determination. For the first time, she felt the weight of what they had accomplished, not just as individuals, but as a collective force. "Then we have to keep going," she said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "We can't let them get away with this." Ethan nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Don't worry, we're just getting started." As Jessica stepped up to the microphone to address the crowd, her nerves melted away. She spoke from the heart, her voice carrying the strength of someone who had been through hell but refused to break. And as the cheers erupted, she realized this wasn't just a fight for her home anymore. It was a fight for justice, for dignity, and for every family facing the same battle. The media firestorm reached its peak when a leaked recording of Rent Control Board Chairman Richard Langston hit the airwaves. In the tape, Langston mocked lower-income tenants, bragging about clearing them out to make way for something better. Outrage erupted nationwide, and under immense public pressure, Langston resigned in disgrace. The fallout didn't stop there. The luxury developers pulled out of their contracts, unable to withstand the scrutiny. Lawsuits flooded in, targeting the board's illegal actions. Jessica and her neighbors, represented by a pro bono legal team, became the face of a growing movement. In court, the evidence was undeniable. Jessica and the tenants not only secured their right to stay, but also won a landmark settlement that forced the city to rewrite its rent control laws. Their victory was a blow to the corruption that had plagued the system for years. Standing on the courthouse steps, Jessica held Tyler's hand as cameras flashed. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "We did it, baby." Tyler smiled and hugged her, the weight of their struggle finally lifted.